Alright, today I'm going to be telling you guys about my Gamefisher 14-foot custom skiff build. I'm going to be showing you guys some pictures and videos of how I customized it and telling you a little story along the way about where it came from. Some of the fish we've caught too. So in 2022, Hurricane Ian was rolling through the Keys, and it definitely was a pretty good scare, but we definitely got lucky, and that's a fact. Compared to what the rest of Florida had gotten, the Keys got fairly lucky. We just got a bad storm surge. So, we had a lot of water come in and out, but not a lot of wind damage. And the scariest part for me was the night before, whenever all the water in my backyard had completely disappeared. It looked like a desert where there should be water. So what this storm surge does will pull all of the water out of the bay, and whenever the storm makes landfall somewhere, that water that left the bay will come rushing back in. And at this point, I wasn't too worried about the storm surge. I was more worried about the winds and rain, which we never really got too bad. So I ended up leaving that night anyways, just to be safe. And when I came home the next morning, this is what I came home to. It didn't look that bad, and there was, some debris in the water, nothing too crazy. So I began the process of cleaning up the backyard and taking all the trash out of the water. And over the next hour, I realized the water level was continuing to rise. And before you know it, it was at the level of my seawall. And this is when I got a little concerned. I didn't realize, but the storm was just now making landfall in southwest Florida. And all that water was just now getting released from that big storm. And over the next hour, it continued to rise about another foot. And nothing too crazy. We definitely got spared, especially where I was living. I got very lucky. But the folks of southwest Florida did not. Sanibel, Fort Myers, Estero Bay, they got absolutely hammered. I don't know if you guys seen any of the videos of what happened, but it's absolutely horrifying to see how bad of a storm Hurricane Ian actually turned into. And even to this day, more than a year later, they're still trying to recover. Prayers out to all the families that were affected by that storm. When the waters finally started receding at my house, we drove through the neighborhood to see if any neighbors needed help. We did a lot of cleaning up the streets and whatever we could to help the neighbors with whatever they needed help with. It was definitely a pretty crazy experience, and we got lucky. It wasn't until the next day when my buddy called me, and he asked if I had wanted a boat. And the first thought in my head was to say no, but for some reason my gut told me yes. And this is what he brought me. A 14-foot Gamefisher. What looked to me like an awesome little rig. And at first I knew I had to do a little work to it, but I seen lots of potential. And we had to go through the salvage process, which took a couple months, but I finally got a title for it. Once I got the boat tagged, I used my buddy's trailer and motor to drive it around for a little while and test it out. I knew that I was going to want a bigger motor, so eventually I ended up buying a brand new 20 horsepower Suzuki, and that's when I really fell in love with this boat. I ran it around for a couple months with just the motor, but I quickly realized that it was going to need a floor, a jack plate, and most definitely a deck. And so that's when I got to the drawing board and got to thinking. Eventually I went to Home Depot and bought all the wood, cut out the deck and floors, and slapped them in place. Once I got the decks in place, I kind of just got a feel for it to see if I liked it. And after that, I began sanding the old fiberglass where all of the new fiberglass would be touching it. I also pre-resined all of the plywood to make sure that it would be waterproof. You don't have to use marine grade plywood when you're building decks for boats. You can just resin both sides of it and that will seal the wood in. I began fiberglassing the floors into place because I knew they weren't going to be going anywhere, and that was the height that I wanted them at. The hard part was going to be building the deck and how to actually support it without losing any storage space. When I was ready to pour the foam, I used chop strand matting to tack the decks into place, and I used a 2-part 6-pound density foam to pour into the floor, and that was going to give me the stability and structure that I needed underneath this wood to give it no flex. Once I put that foam in there, it really turned the floor rock solid. It was pretty nice to see what it had done and how hard the floor actually became. There was zero flex after that foam was installed. After I finished the front floor, I then began working on the deck, and that's when I used some heavy woven fiberglass mat mixed with epoxy resin and some 2" by 2" angle aluminum for support. I then finished the top of the deck with a layer of 1708 with epoxy resin to top that off. And then I used 4 pieces of the angle aluminum underneath the deck for support, which you can see in the pictures here. I then used a 2-ounce fiberglass mat with more epoxy to actually tab that into the boat itself. And once that dried, I grinded off all the overlap and made it all soft and pretty and nice looking. And at this point, I'd already began to paint the boat with some primer and the color of paint that I was going to go for. I was going to go for the Boston Whaler blue. I thought it was going to look good, and it actually came out amazing. And then once the deck had finally dried, I cleaned the whole boat off and kind of started prepping it to get a better idea of what I wanted to do with it in the end. I knew I wanted some more storage, so I cut out the rear seat, and it was filled with old wet foam. So I knew the middle seat was going to have wet foam as well. So I removed all the wet foam and painted the inside of that seat with just some white Flex Seal, and it ended up coming out really good. It's an awesome storage area now. I had to add in some wood support in there as well because the foam that used to be in there is what was the actual support of the seat. I then found out the gray got too hot, so I ended up changing it to white. And this is what it was going to look like with the gray floors, and then this is what it looked like when I changed it to white. After that, I put the grab bar in, and a little bit after that, I did the side hatches in the middle seat, dug out lots more wet foam, did the outside paint, and ended up spray painting my numbers and registration onto the boat, which is awesome because you're never going to worry about it falling off. I mean, not the registration, but the numbers anyways. So here's a couple fish that we've caught out there, and thanks for watching.